and listening to us talk about creating content. We're going to talk specifically today about contributing to pop culture websites. So we are your representatives. I'm going to let folks introduce themselves. But we have Leslie Light, Paulina, I'm so sorry.
Oh, Shistopha. We'll get there.
Thank you. Kate Hansky and Lauren Wheeler. And I'm Amanda Vale, your moderator today. Before we do get into that, I want to acknowledge that we are on Duwamish land. They are the host tribe of Seattle and King County. If you are not familiar with Duwamish, they have an excellent website. You can learn a lot of information, duwamishtribe.org. All right. I'll let these wonderful ladies introduce themselves.
I think I'm on the top of the list. Good morning. My name is Leslie. I am an editor and writer and managerial person at blacknerdproblems.com, which is a website that really seeks to explore pop culture from a Black perspective. We do have other writers of color on staff, trying to be as open and honest about that as possible. Let's see, I have been a writer all my life, but I was a copy editor for about 15 years, and then got into writing and wrote fiction for 5, and moved into writing nonfiction thereafter, and now I have as my responsibility not only book reviewing, but I manage the writers and help them put out their best content, and I manage the some of the other editors and help them improve. So we kind of have 2 mentoring tracks that we run on the website. And that allows us to continue to improve our content and to improve the quality of content in general across the website.
I'm Paulina Pshistopha. I am a writer for WWAC and for Mise en Scene. I'm also a practicing archaeologist and graduate student, so I try my interest in writing pop culture stuff is really to bring a sort of intersection between academic stuff and particularly anthropological topics, and kind of bring those ways of understanding or critiquing stuff into pop culture and thinking about how we construct culture and all of that stuff as well. And I'm primarily a graduate student, but I also can be found on archaeological sites digging very deep holes in the dirt. And so I like kind of balancing the pop culture with the archaeology in my life.
I'm Kate Hansky, and I am an editor on WWAC, and I actually am the editor of the Comics Academ series sort of section on the website, which is focused on working with writers to bring, I've worked with Pauline before, on creating that content that sort of, as she says, bridges the gap between academic writing and traditional pop culture writing. My background was as a teacher and working in comic studies, and anyone who works in comic studies know that publishing opportunities go through that academic process, and so Comics Academ is really a place to create that space for women and non-binary academics outside of the traditional academic publishing, I guess, circus is a good way to describe it. So yeah, my background though is as an editor, writer, reviewer, teacher, and so I try to create that community and that space on WWAC.
I'm Lauren Wheeler, and I'm also a writer at blacknerdproblems.com. Otherwise, I've been writing for a really long time, a lot of poetry primarily, and publishing that as well online. Go back some many years, I would say, probably with blogging and writing on LiveJournal, so that was sort of where I think I got used to writing in front of people on the internet. But also performing poetry, getting used to being on stages in front of people with my writing. And then I've just done a lot of other sort of casual writing for journals, a lot of essays as well as fiction. My day job, after a really long time working in game development, The Sims and Star Wars, The Old Republic, and that sort of thing, I spent some time in robotics and AI, and now I work in social VR, trying to figure out ways to build community and build better band hammers to make that a safe experience.
That's awesome.
Excellent. And I'm Amanda Vale. I am an editor at Bleeding Heart Press. We're a small publisher that rose from the folks who created Women Write About Comics. We publish non-binary and women creators comics and short stories, illustrations, zines, that kind of thing. So let's get right into it. I'll let any panelists jump in on a question. We will have time at the end for questions from the audience, so we're going to aim to leave about 15 minutes for that. So hold on to those. We'll definitely get to them. Would love to hear from you. So first, how do you decide what to write about and where to publish it? Because there are a lot of different platforms out there.
The most important consideration from an editorial perspective is that the topic you're writing about has to match the audience of my publication. There has to be an obvious relationship there because that's how I drive my traffic, right? So if you're thinking about it as a business, we want you to be out there in the world, but if my readership is not the readership for your article, there's no relationship, right? So that's always your first question is, what is the readership of this publication? And I think that is where a lot of writers who are freelancing and sending pitches and reaching out misstep, is they think I've got this fantastic article, everyone will want to read it. You have an audience. And you should know the audience of the publication you send to before you pitch to them. Right? So that's where your real decision making starts is, who do I want to have read this? Who's reading this magazine? Are those the same people? And after you've asked yourself that question, then you can kind of go down the rest of the quality road. But I think that's always your first step.
Yeah, I think as far as choosing what I want to write about, it tends to be, at least for me, just because writing for WAC and Mise en Scene are kind of important but side projects to what I'm currently doing, which is my PhD. But it tends to be kind of the media I'm currently consuming. And it oftentimes is, if I'm talking to like my friends or my partner, or I'm tweeting about it slightly too much, maybe I need to think about it more critically. It's got this kind of seed idea in my brain, but if I'm ending up spending so much time thinking about it that I'm taking away from like cooking or doing my own research, maybe I just need to sit down, write it out, and really think about what my spin is on it. Sometimes, as someone who's a regular contributor to WAC or Mise en Scene, I can just kind of say like, hey, this is sort of generally associated with these websites' mission. Let me ask an editor to see if they're interested in it. But sometimes I'll get really interested in something like I read or I watched all of Iron Fist season 2. But the two folks that I generally write for were like, we chose not to cover that. And I'm like, you know what, that's fine. So I wrote it up for me. I wrote that thing for me, and I put it up for other people on a personal blog because I knew that was more about me getting the writing out than necessarily writing it for that outlet. And it was for me to practice getting through those steps of having an idea, writing through the whole thing, editing it myself to not have other people spend time on it, and then get it out there to see, if my friends want to read it, great. If they don't, at least I thought through my whole idea and got it out and didn't waste any more time on it.
So I think for me too, because I do write and I still occasionally write, a lot of it is I try to write about things that I feel like my voice is a necessary part of the conversation. So I wrote recently about Dietland, if any of you know that television series that recently aired and got canceled. As a fat woman, I wanted there to be a piece by a fat woman about how the fat woman's body was depicted on the show. And I wasn't seeing that anywhere. And so I think that's one of the first lessons that I learned as a writer, is that people will care about what you have to say. That there is an audience, as Leslie said, that there is this audience out there. You just have to know where it is. And related to that, that's one reason that I created or stepped up to really develop Comics Academ, because I felt like there wasn't that space that existed. There is not that kind of other outside of like the comic studies mailing lists and stuff like that, but there wasn't like a space specifically for women academics to put out these things kind of outside of the traditional publishing and create community. So
yeah, for me, I feel like I always have about 15 threads going in my head at some time, and then I will watch a show or binge watch a show, and all of a sudden a bunch of the thinking I've had around the current political climate or something else is crystallized. And that's often when I end up feeling like, instead of just sort of doing like a weekly recap of something where I'm actually writing something that's allowing me to work out my thinking a little bit better. And not necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily say, okay, this is resolved for me, but it is a way of at least putting to rest some of the thoughts that have been sort of creeping along and like bugging me. I think the first piece that I actually published on Black Nerd Problems was about why I was no longer going to be watching Orange is the New Black. And it was at the end of not this past season, but the season before, I believe, where there was a very critical death on the show, and I was pissed, and I was thinking about writing about that anyway, and I went away for a few days for my birthday, and while I was away, there were 2 high-profile police killings, like within a couple of days of my birthday, which is also right around the birthday of the country, and I was like, that's it! And all of a sudden, I had 2,000 words. I was like, okay, well, I guess I did have some things to say, and they just suddenly made sense in a context that they hadn't fully before about why I was done with that show.
Well, evolving out of this, how do you decide whether you're going to write for pay or whether you're going to write for unpaid? What are the benefits and detriments of paid versus unpaid sites?
There are places where I will not allow them to publish my work without giving me money. And that's usually because I know that they have a huge readership and they can afford it. Or I am not as committed maybe to their mission as I am to others, so it feels more like a job and less like a passion project.
Well, we work for WAC, which is unpaid. The site is unpaid, even the editors, and the only money, we have a Patreon now, and the only money that the Patreon is for servers to keep the lights on, to keep the lights on money. And so, I totally understand writers who, are like, I'm not gonna write there, because you can't pay me. Like, you should be paid for your labor. But one place that WAC and other sites like it can be good for is for writers who are just starting out, who want their portfolio. And also, I know Leslie mentioned mentoring. We do a lot of mentoring on our website to help kind of grow writers early in their careers. And I think the space that's created in those communities can be just as important in some ways as monetary compensation, especially when you're first starting out. And we've had many of our writers go on to be paid writers. They work now at Polygon and Nerdist and, IO9 and all that kinds of stuff. So they go on to be paid because of where they started and getting that support and that confidence. That's the other thing, right?
I think that's exactly where we are also, right? That my goal is to pay you.
Right.
But between here and there, my goal is to get you to a place where you are a good enough writer that you can get paid.
Right.
And as important as getting paid is that byline. You want to have a portfolio of 5, 10, 15 articles with a count. I wrote this many words, it went up this day, and I have an estimated hit count of Y. And that is worth money, not now, but that is worth money on your resume when you get there, right? So I think that some people are writers. I write nonfiction because I love to write nonfiction. I want you to know what I think about books. I don't do it to get paid. It's not my goal. So it does not bother me personally, but you have to make that call for yourself as to what you need to be doing. And if you're pursuing it professionally, then you're upping your craft and you're driving to perfection, and you're keeping track of metrics so that you can get the value out of it at the end. But I think we want to say, you see it a lot in the media, oh, unpaid internships are so bad for you. Well, you have to make an individual decision about what your point is. And then you have to make a call and improve your life. Nobody else can make that call for you, right? And so whenever I hire a writer, when people send me work, and they say, hey, we want to publish with you, my first sentence is, we will not pay you. If you want to get paid, these are the places you can go to get paid, right? And so that you can make an informed decision. I just really recommend, I've seen sites that won't give you a byline. So they'll take your work unpaid and then not give you the byline? What? Like, now I've really stolen your work, right? Or you have to write X number of articles before you get a byline, or there's a lot of sort of slightly shady stuff that that is actually more dangerous than simply not making $10 for that article. You want your credit. You can't get everything.
And I will also add that I have the privilege of having a day job that pays me very well. And so I will not go, I don't demand compensation, especially from smaller sites that can't afford it, because I do have that privilege. And so that's my way of kind of paying it forward to the freelancers who rely on that money and those bylines.
I think I had started blogging about these passion projects for myself, but it was kind of getting to the point where there were certain things that I thought that my personal readership wasn't going to grab me, and so I actually met Amanda at here at GeekGirlCon a year ago, and I had this kind of idea for an article that I had already kind of like written a version of, but then I was like, hey, I just saw that you guys had this like comics academia or academ sort of thing. Would this be something that you're interested in? And for me, I had sort of, as a graduate student kind of does, daydreaming about other sorts of things that you could be doing. And I had started writing blogs through, actually there's a local program here in Seattle called Teen Tix, which is for teens interested in theater. I had actually started blogging for them when I was like 16 years old and had like my name on stuff, which was crazy. So I'd always kind of had a step in reviewing things, and it was kind of a coming back to that, but realizing that I still had a lot of work to do as far as a writer, getting kind of sort of reasonable attention for that, because I had a couple times applied for different blogs that I liked, just for, they were looking for contributors, and I put my name forward but never get anything back. And so I just realized, like, I'm just not at that step yet. It wasn't something that's, my personal, or at this time, my personal sort of professional goal, but I wanted to have something that would get me a little bit more of that experience, that editorship that WAC provides, to kind of really improve my writing, because I know that me improving my writing for things like reviews will definitely improve my academic writing. It's a different community, but saying things clearly and to the point, those are things that are across all writing. And so for me, not being paid wasn't as big a deal as really getting my work out to someone else's eyes who wasn't, someone who had a stake in what I was doing, in the sense of like, they're my friend or they're my colleague or something. They're this nice sort of removed feeling for an editor, and so being paid wasn't as important for me. But that was a choice I made.
I think it's important to, as we bang the drum on, I'm gonna get paid, that you have to be worth the money.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have to, if you're the person who wants to be a professional writer, then you have to make sure you are writing at that level of quality. Because it is, the worst thing is for you to be a person in the world who is writing and complaining about not getting paid, but your work is not worth it. Right? That's your worst nightmare, right, as a writer. So keep that in mind when you are thinking about, am I at a place where I am worth, and don't undervalue yourself, be realistic about those numbers, be realistic about your quality, but also don't blow yourself up about where you are. If you're a beginner and your verbs don't match up, then no. And don't ask me, right? Because then now you kind of embarrassed yourself, right? Something to think about.
Yeah.
So we've talked about pay, and we've talked a little bit about community and bylines. Are there anything else that you weigh when deciding where to put your writing or who to pitch to?
Although I haven't pitched outside the sort of WAC mise-en-scene thing, I have my kind of ear to the ground when it comes to Twitter and that sort of thing, because there are, as Leslie's already mentioned, there are kind of dangerous sites out there. There's the sort of stuff where you might put your work, but they'll take it, they'll put it up there without giving you credit. And I think it's important to kind of be aware of the outlets there that you're consuming. If there are controversies, are they doing things that, only the writers are sharing, and it's only if you follow that particular writer that you're going to hear about these sort of back-end things that could be dangerous for you. And I think kind of being aware of what the outlet's mission is that a mission you want to be associated with, is it one that you really care about or not, are really important. And I think that although that's not something that I've done yet with my writing, it's something that kind of I have as far as like whenever we, on WAC and Mise en Scene, we have a sort of like chances to get paid by people, calls for papers or contributors or essays. And whenever I see one go up, there's always this sort of like, oh wait, let me Google that outlet to see if what they're doing is good as well as what they're producing.
I'm ordering my thoughts. Give me 1 second.
And I think another thing to think about is that we're talking kind of like about online content, but where are sort of like opportunities for other types of writing to come out. Like a lot of the creators and writers for WAC, we started Bleeding Heart Press because so many of them were writing fiction as well, and actually we're looking to get things in print and expand into zines. So sometimes getting in with and then podcasts, right? So sometimes finding those organizations that do lots of different types of media create those opportunities to do lots of different types of media. Just the network of people that you meet, when those calls for participation come out, it's not just articles. Sometimes it's zines, sometimes it's creative writing, sometimes it's podcasts, sometimes it's interviews. And so when you're looking for those places, following those writers, looking at the editors and seeing what comes out on Twitter, honestly, social media is a fantastic place to not just learn about opportunities, but to learn, as Pauline was saying, the opportunities you might want to say no to as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking about is that there are lots of different ways to get your message out. There are lots of, maybe your best medium is not the 2,000 word essay. Maybe you really are driving towards a 3-minute video or a podcast conversation with 3 other people, or to think about those things as well that will add some variety maybe to your body of work, because then that allows you to get some new experience and try something different, and that's always fun. And then that gives me as an editor, you're pitching me something new, right? That then allows me to say something really different and fascinating and deliver something to my readership. So we live in a world where there are lots of different ways to put your word out there, and don't be afraid to pitch something a little different, right? I'm going to do a comic about my experience at Geek right? And here's my 16 panels, and it's going to be black and white, and da-da-da. I would run you in a minute. Right? Because that's something different, and that's got value. So don't be afraid to get outside of that sort of staid essay, because there's lots of other ways to do it.
One of my favorite types of online content that I do a lot is interviews. I love interviewing creators, and I try to amplify especially, women and non-binary creators and those from marginalized backgrounds, because those are the voices that are sometimes not as interviewed as other voices. And so that's, again, another type of content. And I enjoy doing interviews, and not everybody does. And so that's another thing where I kind of play to my skill set. I will sit down and talk to people and have a fantastic conversation. Not so good with the writing upside, so I'm working on that. So that's a challenge for me that I've set to myself is you love interviews, you get good interviews, so you also have to do the work and the labor of doing the interview. And so finding out that kind of your strength is also something. Don't hesitate to try it. As she said, maybe the 2,000 word essay is not where you shine. Maybe, you should be in front of a camera or on a podcast. All the podcasters in the room, shout out to you guys, because I can't do that. But, like I said, interviews are kind of like my favorite genre, honestly, because you do get to talk about work in a conversation with the actual creator of that work. And I feel like that's kind of what I try to do in my critical essays, is create a conversation, and I'm actually having that conversation. So it's fantastic.
Lauren, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm thinking about some of the, I think especially in the last few years, as there's just been more and more controversy in various ways around sort of social media, I guess personalities, is a way of putting it. Yeah, there's, I think I consider more now than I probably used to the venue, the editor, manager of various sites or publishers just in general, how I might feel in a year. Am I going to need to send this person an email and ask them to take my content down? How am I going to feel later about contributing to a certain site? And a lot of that has to do with, what my read is on their integrity of the staff, their mission and how closely that aligns with mine. I think from an ethical standpoint. So I think beyond how they treat their writers, there's just a lot of other considerations that I have now. There are some bullets dodged, I think, around people I didn't publish with or anthologies I didn't submit to, and some of the things that have since sort of surfaced. Okay, well.
It's weird sometimes how that gut feeling, you're just like, something about this just seems off, and sometimes when you follow that, you find out a little bit more, and it just kind of reassures you.
Yeah.
Well, so in the interest of leaving room for Q&A, I'm probably just going to answer this one real quick. This is just to set the stage. You've heard us mention it already, but there are a lot of positions available on content websites. So you can be a writer, you can also be a copy editor. You can do web design. You can be one of the content editors. There's a lot that you can do and contribute to a website that will help facilitate other voices. Are there specific positions that I missed?
We also have a few graphics people who do when we need to have custom banners done or logos, and we have video people who cut up our videos and tag them up, and we're working towards making sure they're all captioned properly and things like that. So there's a lot of ways. Any craft that you have that is digital, a website could use it. If you've got something you're passionate about, there's a spot for that.
Social media marketing.
Yeah, a marketing person.
Yeah.
With those people.
Less.
Yes, they're made of gold.
Even back-end positions, like we are a self-funded, self-run website on open source software. So, we need that kind of support. And so it's also nice, because they also write for us as well. But, getting those skills, again, to your resume. If you're a web designer, you may be writing reviews of comics, but you're also helping maintain the site. That's still a line on your resume,
So let's get into the meat of it. I bet that a lot of you are sitting and waiting to hear this. So let's talk about pitches. What do you put into a pitch? What makes a good pitch? If you're a writer pitching, what do you put into your pitch? Editors, what are you looking for in a pitch?
I'll let somebody else go first.
Mine's easy. Comics Academ. I'm always going to, Paulina was like, oh, I heard about this. I'm an academic. I'm like, yes. You are my person. I will work with you and develop what you have. And I think that's, when I'm looking for pitches, I'm listening to people who are like, well, I wrote a paper about this, or I talked about this, or we read this in school, and I'm trying to get that kind of content, so I always try to put kind of an open call of, that paper that you wrote for your English class and it was really interesting to you and your teacher gave it, a whatever grade, but you still can't stop thinking about it. That's the kind of content, that you can pitch anywhere. But I also, think about trying to, like I said, amplify voices of, and when I pitch myself, when I talked about Dietland, and I've written a lot about Faith, the comic book hero from Valiant. You have to look for, amplifying those voices and also, bringing yourself into the conversation if you feel like your voice is being overlooked, and so that's something that I always try to look at too, when I'm looking at pitches and receiving them.
I have 4 things that I look for in a pitch. I want it to be short. If you send me more than 300 words worth of a pitch, then that's an article and I've already stopped reading it. And when I say short, I also want it to the point. I need you to match my audience. Like I said in my first comment, I have had people submit to blacknerdproblems@gmail.com, and they are pitching something written by a white person about white people. You are on the wrong website. I mean, it might be a fantastic pitch, but that's not my audience, right? Okay, but you're a person of color, and you're having this experience where you've read a white author or you've watched Iron Fist, and you're having some feels. That's a different conversation, right? So let's make sure you match where you're headed. Why you and why this? Why are you the person to tell me this story? And why is now the time to tell it? Because then that helps me as an editor. Don't make me think about it.
Mhm.
If I go, oh yeah, I'll be,
Mhm.
then that's way more likely that I'm gonna say yes. For example, we had a person pitch us an article in which she had gone to Botswana. And she was comparing her experience in Botswana to sort of mythical Wakanda,
Mhm.
right? Which, it had some very interesting parts to it about, going back to this mythical land and having this mythical experience. Okay, that's great. I'm gonna hold you for 6 months until the Black Panther movie comes out, and then I'm gonna publish you, right? Because when matters,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So those are the things. So that also means if you've got an idea about something that's happening right now, don't pitch me an Iron Fist content column 2 months from now.
Mhm.
That's not useful to anybody. Put that on your blog and prove that you can write it and get it off your brain and move on, right? So those are some things to really think about, is that timing is important.
Mhm.
The internet is fast. You've got to hit in the first 3 days or it's not going to hit.
Mhm.
So you have to really think about those things. And so sometimes it pays to have a packet of pitches, right? I have opinions about Outlander. Outlander starts next week. Now's the time to pitch that article.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So those are things to kind of think about from your marketing brain of when and why you.
I guess that was 5 things. Is that right?
Yes,
That's fine.
I think a lot about like why am I the author to write about it. So sometimes it works really easy, works really well. Like Tomb Raider, it's really cool to have an archaeologist's
Just talk
perspective
about
on Tomb Raider. But one thing that I've occasionally struggled with actually with Tomb Raider stuff is the when. That's kind of bitten me a couple times. I had a great review article that went out like on time right before this like library edition was supposed to go out. But then a colleague of mine and I started writing this article comparing Lara Croft and a bunch of different stuff. But it was in this weird spot where it was like we had started thinking about it like a week after the movie came out. The new game wasn't coming out for a while, but and we had both at separate times reviewed Lara Croft comics for WAC. And so it kind of took us a while to get this together. It was probably not the best timed article. Mise en Scene still accepted it, which was great, and it was out there, but it was definitely we were trying really hard to go through and it's not great timing exactly for this article, but being archaeologists, what are the things that we are unique and able to say, and knowing that there's a new game coming out, so what are the recommendations we can give with Shadow of the Tomb Raider coming out recently, so what are the things that we can say that this game isn't out yet but people have heard of it? What can we try and get people thinking about in relation to that? But I really think that the why is it you, why you, why now, and what might be kind of unique about your experience that you can put into your review or your pitch, because I think that that's sometimes how you make your review stand out from other folks's. You just had an article about Daredevil season 3, and I have one that's impending right now. But one of the things I didn't eventually put in the pitch because that didn't end up being the thing that was valuable for the overall review I wanted to write was part of my research has to do with orphanages, and a big thing in the season is Catholic stuff in orphanages, and I had all of these little rants about, and so that's a whole separate article. Is this my specific relationship with how do they portray the orphanage system in Daredevil? But I knew that that's not a review. That's not a review. That's an essay. But is there actually enough there to put in it? And I need to think about that a little bit more because I don't know that there is, but I know that the time has passed, so this may be something that might come up again when we have another sort of Daredevil thing that comes about. Let me think about how I can talk about Daredevil in institutions and how that relates to the United States. But yeah, kind of that timing of why me, what is it about me specifically in my experiences, and how does it fit with the sort of the seasonality of a lot of these things that we're writing about.
Anything else to add? Good. All right, so let's talk about what writers need to get going. You guys have already touched on this a little bit, but you can take this opportunity if you want to expand on what you said earlier.
I mean, blogs, personal blogs are great, right? You share it with your friends, you share it with people who you trust, you just start getting chops of writing for an audience in a way that you're not used to and getting feedback. And hopefully you do have enough of a writers community where you can get honest feedback from people who you trust, right? They can edit for you. They can tell you what you need to push on more, where the fat is that you can cut. I think that I probably wouldn't have kept writing if I didn't have a writing community, because that was such a huge part of how I got better. And also that gave me people who were able to tell me that they liked what they were reading before strangers were reading things.
And we also mentioned social media, and so I think that's also something to mention again. Yes, you want, writing and you want that community and support, but then you need to know where to go, right? And so you have to get on social media. You have to find, start following the people that, who give out pitches, and start reading the articles on the website. That's the thing. Know the audience of the website, know what they write about, see how you fit in. If, an article that you're writing is something that was also just written, you have to be aware. Do not pitch, kind of like something that just came out and reviewed. That's something to be aware of. So reading is also something to do to get prepared. Which it sounds dumb, but there are so many sites out there. So when you're trying to consider what's going on and everything that they've written before, it can take a while. It takes a while to do your research.
Yeah, I think those are the two. If you pitch to me, the first thing I do is search your name. Right? So if I hit a personal blog, that's great. If I hit your Twitter feed, that's great, right? You don't have to be a social media queen, right? I am not. But having a presence, unless you are truly a new writer, having a presence somewhere where I can at least get a feel for who you are and whether I want you on my site. Because we were talking about how you want to investigate them to make sure that their mission is somewhere. I'm going to investigate you to make sure I am not publishing somebody problematic in a variety of different ways. So just kind of consider it, right? And you don't have to, I wouldn't, oh my God, I don't have 4,000 followers, they'll never publish me. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that you should have a presence that you could be proud of. Because I'm gonna look.
I think also with whatever online presence you have, to be honest about who you are. If you had, be honest about what your experience is, and don't, unless you are pitching part of a persona, which I don't know that I would want to do. I don't know about other folks, but just that, make sure that it's you. You want to be representing who you are, and with what you're writing, you want it to be your writing, your unique voice, and all of that stuff. Having your social media, have your, other blogs or whatever be part of that. You are, selling yourself to a certain degree. You're presenting a particular person to the world. Make sure that that's who people find when they search you as well. Authenticity, yeah.
I think that's a good way to think about it, right? If we search you and your Facebook looks totally different than your Twitter, we joke about that, right? But there's this idea of being an authentic person, and that does kind of mean being the same person or showing different facets of the same person. You can tell it's the same person across platforms,
So we've got about 5 minutes left for questions up here. I want to make sure we leave time for questions from the audience. So this might be the one. This might be our last formal question. So let's talk about how editors work with writers and where editors come into the process.
Your editor is your best friend. They will make you look and sound like you sound in your head. That's what my job is, right? That's what I consider my calling as an editor, is to make you sound and look that good. But that has to be a respectful relationship, right? And generally you submit to me, I will review it, and then send you back some critical feedback. Cut this, too emotional here, add this, give me more of this. I'm not gonna, when I do my copy edits and fix your grammar, I don't ask you about that, because that's not your job, that's mine. But it's definitely, it can take 3-4 rounds to get it right. And that can be grueling when it's something you love. But that's the thing to keep in mind, is that the editor is there to help you put your best foot forward and to sound fantastic. And if it gets too grueling, maybe you're in the wrong place, right? And maybe the editor is trying to get you somewhere you don't want to go. So don't ever feel, especially on a spot when you're a volunteer and you're on mission, right? Don't feel bad about, oh, okay, you're asking me to go somewhere I don't want this article to go. So I'm going to pull it. Right? I, as the editor, may be annoyed that I have invested effort, but I would rather be annoyed and you walk away happy than you publish something you're not happy with. And then I got to manage your attitude for the next 20 years, right? Like, that's not actually a fun thing. So just, it's still yours, and you still have to own it and be responsible for it. But the relationship is definitely a very much a growth process relationship. And if you invest in that, you get a lot out of it, I think. I don't know. Our writers will have to tell me. It's something worth it.
I know I've been frustrated when I have not gotten enough editing. And that happened a few years ago in a really sad situation with a publisher where I had a poetry manuscript accepted, and I spent about 4 months nagging the F out of this woman, trying to get edits from her, because I at least was an honest enough writer to know that not all of this needs to be in this book, and some of this needs to be better than it is right now. And I ended up pulling it because I didn't want to embarrass myself by putting out trash. Like, if there's an editor, I want you to make me look better. Like, that is what I want from my editor, to make my writing better.
I've worked with a lot of different editors at Mise en Scene and WOAC, and everyone edits a little bit differently. So when you're pitching to a different editor, you kind of have to get used to their style. Some people will, get into your GDoc and like edit everything. You get, I think I got like 30 notifications once because everyone was like putting in all the commas I'd forgotten because I'm terrible at commas. And so sometimes that's like a shock, but I know that that back and forth with the editor is really where they always help you distill what you actually want out of it. And I tend to think of myself as a terrible writer but a great editor, at least for myself, because I know that my first draft there's always too much in it. Whatever that it is, there's too much. But kind of, I know that the process is about refining exactly what your point is, and to a certain point, you can only look at least for me, I can only look at my stuff so much before I've gotten so into it that I don't know where to go yet. And I think that once I read it through and I'm like, you know what, I'm happy with someone else seeing this, that's when I send it off to an editor, and that's when they make it even more magical. Like, they are able to say, like, okay, so they see those points that you're trying to make, and then they make it better. They help you cut the chaff, and get more to your point, make you sparkle, which is one of the reasons why I really love editors. I always still have, even writing for academic stuff or writing papers for classes or writing for WAC, I still have that sort of apprehension of like sending it off to an editor. But after 5 or 10 minutes, I'm like, you know what, this is going to come back. We're going to work together, and we're going to make this the best piece that this is going to be. And I really love that about editors. So.
I just want to say quickly, because I think I can summarize it. I come from a fan fiction writing background, so my role as your editor is your beta. I'm your beta reader. I'm here to make you better. I'm here to make you sound like you want to sound. That's my goal. And sometimes that means telling you what the tone is right for the audience. Sometimes it's translating. Especially, like I said, as comics academic, I'm trying to translate academic writing for an audience that doesn't have a disciplinary degree, a master's degree in whatever it is you're writing about. And sometimes that does mean, okay, we need to simplify this or cut that. But yeah, my best relationships with editors are ones where it kind of comes to this beta. I always think of my editors as my beta, and I try to do that, myself, as, know that you're being supported. It comes from a place of support. It comes from a place of wanting you to be better.
Awesome. Well, let's take this time. We've got about 15 minutes left in this panel, so let's have some questions from the audience. I do want to note, if you have specific pitches, don't pitch us here. I can probably say that a lot of us would be happy to talk with you about it afterward, but if you have questions about pitching, you can ask us now. Does that make sense? All right.
Often writing comes with reading a lot in the field and doing research about the type of style and writing. Who do you recommend, for yourself, when you want to get a feel for, who do you look up to as far as your favorite pop culture writers or sites or blogs that you read on a regular basis and would put them as on a recommended reading list for someone who's not as familiar with pop culture writing?
Yeah, let me repeat the question before you guys answer. So, just so all you can hear, she asked, what recommended sites would our panelists advise aspiring writers to read? Did I summarize that right?
In addition to your own sites.
Yeah, in addition to, us, of course.
That's a great question.
Yeah, there are a few.
There are some people that every time they go through my timeline, I tap out. But I want to know what you have to say. I'm trying to think of their names.
Charlie Anders,
Oh, yeah,
Anders,
Charlie Anders.
Iodine, their spouse, Annalise,
I would recommend the Mary Sue not because you necessarily want to write that way, but that is the mainstream. That is the boat where pop culture, particularly writing for women or people of color, that's the middle. And so if you have a feel for the things they are talking about, then you have a feel for the market. Right?
Also, trying to remember where Livia Baker, I'm trying to remember what site she writes for. Is it the Daily Dot? Yeah, I think it's the Daily Dot, because sometimes they do a little bit more on the fan side, so it depends on what you're doing. Like, I go to Sci-Fi Fangirls when I want to see what's selling, sometimes, what are those topics and how are they covering it versus how would I cover it? And then, like I said, for the more fan stuff, I kind of go to, I think her name is Gabby Whittaker-Baker, don't quote me on that, at the Daily Dot. Asia Romano was friends with her, and so that's how I know that side. But yeah, I mean, it depends on, again, what kind of writing you want to do.
There's a woman writing for about games on Kotaku. I'm going to pull her name right now, and she is fantastic.
Yeah, I enjoy the what used to be known as the Gawker constellation of websites. I really like how each site has a sort of tone goal that I think is really valuable. And it's interesting to see when they cross-post across their websites where different things intersect. As far as, if you really want to look at related but very pointedly different sort of writing styles, I really like going through their stuff. I'm terrible at remembering author names, and I was actually going to recommend some of the. I really love the stuff that Black Men Problems writes. I love it, and so I sign up for the newsletter. It's great.
We have fun.
Yeah.
I actually also read a fair number of sports writers.
That's interesting.
Sports writers.
Sports writing has a really long and storied history of being interesting and because it has half the time it has to teach you how the game is played before you can understand whatever their commentary is about the thing. And so there are some fantastic sports writers that would be very worth emulating, or even music writers. I recommend a fellow by the name, I'm going to butcher his last name, Hanif Abdurraqib.
Oh, yes.
Hanif. He's a poet. He used to write for MTV News. He does a variety of essays, just really insightful. He's sardonic as heck, right, which is also funny. But I totally recommend him for an idea of, oh, hey, you want your own voice. And I can tell his tweets in my feed without saying his name because his voice is that clear. And you want to be that person in your essay, right? Is that I can read your essay and do it to you. So him, let me find this other, why is there no internet in this room?
Are you looking for Gita Jackson?
Gina Jackson?
Gita Jackson?
No.
Cecilia D'Anastasio?
Ding! Thank you.
There you go.
D'Anastasio. I was like, Anastasia? No, that's not it.
She's excellent.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we've got 10 minutes. You had a question, right?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. Who else has a question? Yes.
Earlier on, when you were talking about building up a portfolio, you mentioned you could show, what as an editor you'd be looking for to get from somebody. And you I published here, and then you mentioned hit counts.
Yeah.
Is that something that you kind of can automatically assume that you're going to get from, assuming they're not disreputable, but is that something that a publisher will give you?
You can ask for it. They have that number.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for those who may not have heard, he's asking about hit counts, and how do writers get access to website traffic?
Yeah, it would be totally legit to me if a guest contributor came back and said, okay, you published my article on Monday, can you give me a rough estimate of how many people have seen it or shared it? And I would absolutely give you that number. That's not proprietary in any way, but it allows you to know, did I hit my audience and did they like it?
And I know if you have your like a personal blog, like my blog spot has a little like page views thing. It was just occasionally annoying when I'm like checking to see if some of the HTML or whatever is coming off correct. So it'll have like 15 page views and I'm like, this isn't even live yet. I know that you're just getting myself. But it's a good thing to check after, like if you post onto your own blog, like, hey, here's a link to it, even if it's just on your personal Facebook or your Twitter, it kind of gives you a certain gauge, like, okay, 20 or 25 of those are me checking back at my website. But kind of over that, you're like, okay, so who like, someone is actually looking at this, that's not me. And those are very rough metrics, they are for your personal blog, but I think that they're important to understand, to see even if, you know, the people who care about you already, because they're on your Facebook, they're on your Twitter, if they're checking out your stuff or not, because I think that hypothetically they like you. And so they have an investment in making sure that your stuff is good. So, but if they're even not quite getting it, maybe you need to think about what you're writing and how that, if that's not even capturing a sort of captive audience, what's going on here, and thinking about that for your own writing.
Right. Go for it.
So this is kind of a broad question, but like, how do you decide if what you want to say would be better as a blog, a vlog, or a podcast? Like when you're creating that content.
So the question is deciding between blog, or podcasts for your particular content, right?
Yeah, if you're like self-publishing, you're not.
Oh yeah, for self-publishing.
Who's your audience? Because I think, like, I hate to say this, I don't really listen to podcasts. You know, I mean, I totally respect people who make them, but if there's something on a podcast, then I'm not necessarily going to find out what that is. Just because that's not my community. And the same thing with blogs. Like, I know people who just follow YouTubers and are obsessed with them, but that's not my interest. And so when you're thinking about, you know, what community do you want to go into, what are you a part of, and where do you want that content to go? I think is a big consideration, and also what your comfort level is. You know, if you're not comfortable in front of a camera and you're not comfortable speaking on audio and editing, especially when you're early stuff, that technical side, you know, like unless, you know, that's where you're going is trying to be like, I am a digital content creator and I can edit audio and edit video, then maybe writing for the first time.
Is it something that's in my experience, a vlog requires a certain level of energy, and it's not necessarily a good place for a deep dive full of footnotes, as opposed to an essay, right? That you can chock full of every hyperlink to every research site you did. I think just in general, podcasts are better as a conversation between you and one or two other people. You talking about your favorite thing for 10 or 15 minutes on a podcast.
You could have written that down.
Yeah.
It could have been an email.
It could have been an email.
Twitter thread.
So like that's really what, how deep am I diving here? And what kind of message do I want to send? Like I said, some things are even, if you've got something super autobiographical and you have a knack for drawing, is a comic, a web comic, an ongoing, you know, strip, is that a choice for you? Like that's a world that we live in now where those things can all happen.
All right. Yes.
I know research is important, but I personally tend to fall down like research holes and then never actually get any writing done. How do you balance time spent researching and time spent writing?
Right. So the question's about balancing time spent.
If someone has an answer to that, let me know. I mean, honestly, as an academic, also, right?
Yeah. Well, so for me, I was having a hard time focusing in general this last year. So I was looking really hard into productivity techniques. And they're not all great, and you have to work with like what works for you. But for me, I started going back to kind of the thing, how did I, not this is gonna sound like super cheesy, but like originally write? And so I'm like, well, I learned to write in school doing like timed essays in class. And so this is not advocating for it, but there's a thing called the Pomodoro technique where you set a 25-minute timer. Do whatever you want with that. But basically, I started setting a timer for myself. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sit here. I have my blue creative content notebook with my pen. I'm setting this thing to 25 minutes. My topic is this. I'm gonna write for 25 minutes on this topic. That's how I still come back to writing reviews for WAC. And it's just like, I'm literally spending 25 minutes focusing on that thing. And my hope is that kind of by the end of 25 minutes, which with my terrible handwriting, I still end up getting like 500, 700, 1,000 words down in 25 minutes if it's a topic I really care about. That's at first draft. And so once you have that first draft, I type it up. That struggle with reading my own handwriting is a form of editing. And then going from there, I can say like, okay, I can go back and be like, wait, what were my main points? What was my thesis again? And then that's when I start doing research, is like, okay, this idea came from, oh, I remembered reading this article. And then I find that hyperlink and I put it in there. And so for me, avoiding the research hole is literally just taking the time to focus specifically on the one thing that I'm writing about first. And not necessarily leaving research to the second, but your ideas always come from somewhere. Like we build on each other's knowledge everywhere. So I think it's important to kind of write your story, your beginning, middle, and end all the way out, and then fill in the links with research on the other end. Because you can always add detail, but I think that having that encapsulated thing first, at least for me, has allowed me to not get stuck in research holes. Because it's super easy to keep clicking on Wikipedia, but if I have a completed thing, it's a lot. It grounds me in a way that researching first doesn't.
I have a friend of mine who was saying that she writes on a tablet with a Bluetooth keyboard because that removes the 47 tabs, right? So that you can't be in research land, you are only in writing land. I think that where I get lost and I have to not do it is as I'm in my second phase, right, and I'm writing the second time through, then I start adding, and oh, now I have another fact. I need to go research that new fact. Don't add it, right? Unless that is really core to your argument and you just missed it, don't add extra stuff. As an editor, if you bring me something, I want to know that it is correct. So if I am reading it and in the first paragraph you have misspelled the actor's name, I doubt you, and I doubt everything that comes after that. Right? So there are some facts that are incredibly simple and straightforward to get right, and do not expect your editor to do that for you, because really, if the apostrophe if the hyphen in Spider-Man is wrong, I don't think you're a fan. Right? And it's just that simple and that fast. So think about that when you submit to an editor. It doesn't have to be perfect, but there are certain things that trigger me to second guess your expertise, and you don't want to do that.
All right, and guys, that's a wrap. We are at
goodness.
12:30. Thank you all.